Hi ho, folkies! I hope you're all well. I thought I'd take a minute to talk through the reflection on stakeholder engagement exercise assignment for you so you can understand a little bit better. Now, as per usual, crappy little graphics on the first slide to talk you through the process that you might need to come to grips with to try and get this assignment written, right? So we've got, of course, a nice little picture of people sitting around in a group talking to each other, sharing ideas, which is your stakeholder engagement process. Then you need to do a bit of reflective thinking and think, how did that go? And what came together to make it good, bad, otherwise, what were your learnings, all of that sort of stuff. And one of the things that we're asking you to use is the Sinn Féin framework. And it's a very specific framework that's talked about by an author, Snowden, and I've put some resources up on the Milo site for you. Now, I'm not going to profess to being any expert on this framework, so I'm not going to make the focus of this discussion that specific framework, because you'll get more information about this at the residential. But nonetheless, these are some things to think about before you type up your response, which you actually will be doing at the residential. So this assignment is a little bit different to the other ones because it's technically like we run it like a UTAS submitted assessment. There's a bit of extra information up online for you. We've given you some resources, all of that sort of stuff. But it's submitted at the residential itself, and you just need to send it via email. So you'll see that on the slide there, I've got it listed as the third assignment that you submit at the residential, even though it is something that we give you additional information for on the Milo site. So this assignment is actually due at the residential, as I noted before. You'll be provided with that due date when you go along. The word count is 1,000 words maximum, and it's weighted at 20%, so it's a graded task. And it's graded as a collaboration between the university and the police academy. So where there's people from both sides that do the work of grading this assignment. So what do you need to do? As part of your stakeholder engagement exercise process, we're asking you to critically reflect on your experience of working in a syndicate. And I have actually put some information up on the Milo site for you that talks about critical reflection. There's a little bit of a video, there's a few readings and things like that you can work through to really think about what critical reflection is. This process also talks, you need to think about how you engaged with the stakeholders and how you prepared for and delivered the presentation. In the first part of the task, we'd really like you to think about what you contributed to this process overall, what you learned, what you might do differently next time. So, how might you be a better leader in that process of interacting in a syndicate and with stakeholders down the track or in the future? In the second part of the task, we encourage you to think about how the Sinn Féin framework might be applied to help you think reflectively about the syndicate, about yourself, and about how you worked with the stakeholder engagement exercise. And most importantly, there's no referencing required for this task. So it really is a process that you go through on your own. It's an individual discussion about how you engaged in that process. So we've given you a bit of a suggested structure here, but it's fairly straightforward. We haven't made it really specific because we are genuinely interested in seeing how you address it in different ways, I guess, because we've never done this assignment before. But most importantly, you do need to talk about, in some way, the syndicate dynamics. But don't, make it a slagging match where you're just like talking about how terrible people were and all of that sort of stuff. Really think about how you contributed to the process and what your learnings were in that context around the stakeholder engagement, the presentation, all of those types of things. It's very important. And try and include some examples that illustrate your thinking. Then we talk about, the impact of the Sinn Féin framework. So what are the leadership domains? Think about that session that they run at the residential and the handout, and there's other information up online for you. And how it applied to the stakeholder engagement issue, and whether the different thinking in the relevant domain helped you to work through the problem and identify a solution. So it's actually thinking about which bits of the framework applied to that issue and that solution. And you might even be able to think of it in terms of issues or problems that came up while you were doing the stakeholder engagement process as well. But that's just a little bit of a suggested structure. It doesn't matter really how you address this. What's important is that you just cover off on those areas so that you can address the marking rubric. So some general tips in terms of it being a reflective exercise. Of course, you can use first person language. Try to think deeply about what you brought to the process of working together with others in the syndicate environment. What went well? What would you change if you had a chance to go back and do it again? I find that people tend, because I have done something like this with the TASPOL cohort, they tend to focus on what happened in the syndicate and describing the syndicate processes rather than saying, this is what worked really well, this is how I contributed to that, this is how I didn't perhaps do so well, and what I would change in future. So really think about that very carefully. We don't want to know how everything was crap. We really want to know about your own position in that process, working with the stakeholders, all of that sort of stuff. So it might be about things like how you took a back seat in the syndicate process, and then note what you did instead and what you learned out of doing that. When you're thinking about the Sinn Féin framework, make sure you're applying it specifically. What part will you focus on regarding the syndicate process, and which bit of the framework was really helpful in terms of how it applied? So think about that really specifically too. Common problems in past student assignments, again this was with the TASPOL cohort, was how they focused on their personal learning in terms of how successful the syndicate process was, rather than your own personal growth. So make sure that you're thinking about that carefully. What challenged you about the process, and what will you take forward as a leader in your police organisation in relation to how that happened? Sometimes people focus too much on describing what the syndicate did, and sometimes people don't develop paragraphs appropriately because they're trying to jam in as many things as possible. Keep it short, keep it nice and tight in terms of specific issues so that you're developing your paragraphs in detail. What does the marking rubric say? You've got to have critically reflective discussion with collaboration, pros and cons, evidence of proactive, thoughtful syndicate leadership, identifying your personal learnings as a leader that came out of the syndicate work, and making sure that you're thinking about how you might have missed opportunities as a leader in that process. You also need to identify applicable Sinn Féin leadership domains around this that are relevant to the stakeholder issue and why, and critically reflect on the value of that framework and how it helped you think through the stakeholder issue. And then, of course, you've got communication, which is clearly and concisely addressing the task purpose, having an intro, body, conclusion, although that's quite difficult to have a full intro and a full conclusion in a 1,000-worder. So how you do that can be a little bit creative. And consistently ensuring your spelling and grammar are correct. This is a basic reminder to tell you to think about structure. I'm not going to say that you need to structure as an essay, but just think about your structure so you've got all the points there. I've given you an example of a reflective paragraph from a TASPOL assignment that did really well. And you can see that this person is specifically talking about what they did and what their role was. And how they were reflecting critically on themselves, which is it was pretty good. It was pretty good assignment. And they talked about this in detail. They don't just quickly say, I'm less tolerant of different working styles. This really wasn't the best for me. They actually say what they've learned in that process and how they're going to move forward, which is, that's what you need to be aiming for. So I've only given you this specific paragraph because this was one of the most demonstrative ones. Look, that's it. I hope that's helpful for you and it gets you thinking about this task before you go to the residential. If you've got any questions at all, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Have a great day. See you later.